Okay, this is going to be my video on the hero archetype. Now, as many of you know, I have an issue with sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman's book on killing. I have in a few issue with his statement on his website about police officers being sheepdogs and us civilians being sheep and having to protect us from the wolves. Well, here's the thing about it. I've heard that before. It doesn't play out. It's actually incorrect based on psychology. Here's why. Uh, Grab my notes here. When we're talking about the hero archetype, there's a lot of other archetypes involved within your mind. I want to get to the four major ones: the self, the ego, the shadow, and the persona. The self is the regulating center of the mind. It's what keeps everything together, everything running and functioning. If it were a universe, it would be the sun. The persona is the mask that we all wear, the archetypes we play, the roles we play in life to function and do things as we see them. The ego is how we perceive the world around us and, ironically, ourselves at some level. This is based on four methods of doing so, and most people manifest one method of doing so originally, and then as they get older, they manifest them at different stages in their life. These are sensation, understanding the world around us through what we see, hear, touch, can actually put our hands on, feel with our five senses. Thinking, which is rationalization. Feeling, which is our emotions. And intuition, which is instinct. Now, this is how we perceive the world, but we also use the world outside as a means of perceiving ourselves. The shadow is our own psychological weaknesses, the things that we don't want to face, that we don't like about ourselves, not physically, but emotionally and mentally, that a lot of people just don't want to cope with. Now, the shadow is always trying to reach the ego, and the persona is what protects the ego from the shadow. Think of it like this. You have an egg. Inside the egg is the yolk. And the egg white, but we'll just use the yolk for now. Inside the yolk, or that yolk, is the ego. Around it, the eggshell protecting it, is the persona. Now, the shadow is always trying to crack through the persona. And the self always allows this to happen because this is a functioning method for how the mind works. The self tries to regulate and understand both the shadow and the ego, and kind of is always trying to merge them because they're two sides of the same coin. Now, what happens is this: the shadow is always making cracks in the shell of the persona. Eventually, when enough of the shadow has made enough cracks in the persona, you get a cracked egg. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because we're looking at the hero archetype, and there's several other archetypes out there. The hero archetype is always considered the protector of the weak and the downtrodden and the innocent, and the punisher of the wicked and the corrupt and so forth. Now, what happens is this. As the shadow is cracking on the shell of the persona, a little bit of that little darkness from the shadow is manifesting itself in the shell of the persona. And the shadow, the rage, the vengeance, the self-righteousness, the things that we don't want to face about ourselves, that, we might be wrong, but we still fervently, zealously project our convictions as if we're always right, will have one to lean less from protecting the innocent and more towards punishing the wicked. And at times we begin to justify ourselves depending on how our ego perceives the world around us, especially when you're talking about thinking or feeling types of people. who are mainly do everything through thinking and feeling, especially feeling, because the moment they hear about a crime which emotionally upsets them, emotionally disturbs their ego, the shadow leads to the thinking, rationalization, justifying of their own corrupt action, their own slide from being the hero to being the villain. Now, there's a long manifestation of the hero's journey done by different psychologists, different authors. Uh, but basically, here's what happens. There's a point to where the hero becomes the villain and moves from being the villain to often what's referred to as being the magician or the wizard or the wise man, who is basically both hero and villain. He does the right things for the wrong reasons and the wrong things for the right reasons. He has his own way, his own mind, and he's mysterious. He's hard to figure out where he is along those lines, because he betrays his friends to get closer to his enemy, to ultimately betray his enemy, and then set him up for failure and use his own friends to wreak havoc with him while he slides away. And this journey takes place. Everyone has to go through it. We're all the heroes of our own lives, whether we realize it or not. And that's something I kind of disagree with Grossman on, because very specifically, when you start teaching that people can be categorized as wolf, sheep, and sheepdog, you're seeing the villain, which is the wolf, the sheepdog, which is the hero, and the sheep, which are the victims. We must all be the victims so that these other people, this regulating society of sheepdogs, can be there to protect us. The problem is we forget that the sheepdog works for the shepherd. Now, who's the shepherd in our world? The government. And the government lives off of fleecing the sheep, the civilians. And when the shepherd gets hungry, he eats, you got it, lamb chops. And where does the sheepdog get his food? Of course, from the shepherd's table. To put this in another way, law enforcement, military, the sheepdogs who are there to protect us often are there because, well, our taxes fund them. Without our taxes, they wouldn't exist. They would simply, they wouldn't matter. There would be no funding for those agencies. There'd be no funding for the government itself, which is, of course, the shepherd. The problem you have is that you have the wolves. Now, a wolf can go one way or the other. We're taught by Colonel Grossman's archetype that the wolf always preys on the sheep. Well, that's not true. By nature, wolves hunt other animals, rabbits, deer. They're off in the woods doing their own thing. Yeah, sure, you might have a few that might come after a sheep or two, but ultimately, those are the ones which you do need the sheepdog for, to be put down. But you have to realize that we're human beings, and that there's no heroes there to come protect us. I know this might, kind of injure the ego of certain people out there. This might kind of injure the ego of some mothers out there whose sons are in the military. But no, there are no sheepdogs. There's no people out there come to protect us. No heroes come to save the day. There's just people doing their jobs. And some of those people have to put themselves between us and harm's way. That's true. But you also have to realize some of these people, some of their own problems, some of their own issues, some of the things that have happened to them or they're happening to them on that job are bleeding through and cracking that shell of a persona. And they're slowly turning them from, playing the hero to slowly becoming the villain to the world around them. Simply because of how this manifests. Now, to everyone else, you need to bear in mind when I'm saying this, is that the hero, the villain, whatever, it's a way of us to understand ourselves. And in fact, I do have the book on killing from Colonel Grossman right here. When he's talking about moral distance, he talks about an intense moral superiority, and there's a vengeful vigilante actions associated with many civil wars. It's on page 160. The whole thing on creating the emotional distance, of course, is starts on page 158 of On Killing, and I suggest that people read this book. Even though I do have things about it that I disagree with, I still think it's worthy of a read. It's a very highly recommended book by me. Um, the fact of the matter is that you have to be conscious of the fact that there's a dark side, that the hero can become the villain, and that you are the hero of your own life. What you do determines where you are and where you will be in your life, and nothing else but that matters.